Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to discuss The Witches. Now, this is the rebooted version of the film I'm going to discuss today, which came out back in October of this year. It's based around a film. I'm trying to remember the year of the original film. It's not even based on an original film. It's actually based on a story written by I'm going to butcher this guy's name, and I do apologize. Roald Dahl. It's Roald Dahl. Now, you may not know that name, you may not recognize that name very well, but what I will tell you is he's the author of some of the better stories of the generation where he was writing for, and that became some of the great movies of our time, especially my time. Here's some of the things that he wrote. James and the Giant Peach is by him. The Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Gremlins, an original story by him. I don't think it has any relation to the movies that came out, but he did write a story, The Gremlins. And here's a big one, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Yeah, this is the guy who wrote that story, which became the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which was loosely based on the book, from what I know about. And the newer version that came out with Johnny Depp a couple of years ago, that was titled Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, is more to the book than the original was, from what I've learned. I've never read these books. I do want to read them eventually. He has written a bunch of other things. These are just a couple of his titles. He was a huge excuse me. He was a huge author between the early 40s and I would say throughout the 80s. I don't think I know when he passed away, but I feel like the 80s was when like his last few books came out, and one of those books just so happened to be The Witches. And its first adaptation was done in 1990. And again, it could have been a loose interpretation, and this new rebooted version is probably more book friendly. I haven't read the book, so I can't really comment on that. What I will comment on is watching the original from 1990 to this reboot 30 years later. So now, the original had a certain kind of quality to it where, it's a 90s movie. It's how all the movies were different back then than they are now. You have a certain level of technological things that you can do in that time and era. One of the things being how the witch's look is portrayed. How they portrayed them in the 1990 movie was it was a lot of makeup, it was a lot of aesthetics added to their hands and their faces, a lot of putty, and it was very realistic because it was real. It wasn't computer generated. And that's what gives it just a little bit more creepiness. And even though it was creepy, it was also very campy because it's actually a kid's movie in a way. It's about a little boy who is taught that witches are real, and then he goes on a vacation where he discovers there's a witch convention going on, and he discovers their plan to like murder all the children in England and then eventually the world, and he decides that he has to stop them. But he gets caught, and they turn him into a mouse. And they turn another kid in the same, not even his, they just met that day, this other kid, and they turn him into a mouse, and they become best friends, being that they can talk like the are normal kids, and they're mice, and they're running around trying to stop a clan full of witches. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun story, and I really should read the book. I don't think the book would be that long of a read. It's not that long of a story, and it's a story that's fun. I'm not going to say it's a good story. It's a fun story. It's not anything that's going to win any Academy Awards. But then again, a lot of movies don't have to. And that's what people have to understand. You can't watch every movie with the same critical outlook that you would a movie that's supposed to be on an Academy Awards list. They make movies for fun. They make movies to make money. They make movies to win awards. Those are the three categories. This is a fun movie. This is a movie that has a following that I mean, they definitely made money off it, even though it wasn't even released in theaters. This is a straight to stream film that's an HBO Max original, and I think HBO is really trying to push this service and trying to really compete with things like Netflix, and that's why they're picking up on stories like this, trying to take. And I know one of the biggest ones they have going on right now is the release of the Justice League Snyder Cut, but you can only hype people up so much for that. So they have to push out more of their own stuff. So The Witches is a good step in that direction because not only does it bring back that nostalgia feeling, it's just a fun movie. It's a fun movie to watch. October was a perfect time to release it because it's the Halloween season. What better time to watch a movie about witches than during Halloween? It's smart. It's smart business on their part. Now, again, I can't relate it to the book. I've never read the book. Maybe people who have read the book look at the original and say that sucks. They look at this one and say it's better, it's more based on the book. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just coming from the perspective of my love for the first film, and I can't say this doesn't live up to it. It's just different. So, like, one of the huge things that I dislike about it is the ending, and I'll get to that eventually. But let's just go through a little bit of what the difference between each one is. So, like I said about the 1991, there's a certain aesthetic to it. There's the makeup work that's done to make the witches look a certain way. In this one, they don't really look that much different. Like when the witches in the first film took off their wigs and their fake faces, they showed really grotesque figures. They would be having fake ears, fake hands, and they would reveal who they really are. And it's just so realistic. Now, with this one, of course, it has the upgraded um, technology to do more, but it doesn't do more. It kind of just makes it simpler. And I gotta say, Anne Hathaway as the Grand High Witch is perfection. By far one of my favorite roles that I've seen her in since, Batman The Dark Knight Rises, where she played Catwoman. Like, Anne Hathaway's a great actress. She can do just about anything, and I wouldn't think poorly of her. And this is just fun to see her. And it's good to see her take roles that she probably just has fun with. And you can tell she's having fun with this role. She adores being this character. But there's no there's nothing real different, like when those witches, I'll say it again, when those witches take off their fake skin to show what they really look like, it's how, again, it's probably how witches were viewed back then and how they're like, oh, this is how a witch should look. So I guess they make them more human for this reboot, but you just expect a little bit more. And I guess they were really going for a more campy feeling or a more friendly kid feeling, and maybe that version was a little too creepy, and they wanted this reboot to be even more family friendly. So really, all they do is they take off their wigs, they're bald, and they take off their shoes. They have one toe, and then they have really long fingers, and their mouths stretch really wide. And I don't think they realize that even though the witches from the 1990 version can be creepy just from how they look, a lot of people find the wide mouth look very creepy. The wide mouth look is a real fear factor for a lot of people, and they don't like that when it pops up in horror movies, let alone this kid friendly movie. So when she smiles, and her smile looks like the Cheshire Cat, but it's not a cartoon, that's even creepier for some people. And it was even weird to look at because it's very imposed. I'm not going to say that it's poor editing or poor special effects. Maybe it's just that it's Anne Hathaway's face doesn't look good with that kind of smile. And again, maybe this is how it's described in the book, maybe it's not. All I know is that they could have done a little bit more, kind of just making her float in the air for the purpose of her being a witch and floating in the air. Like, you talk about wanting to eliminate certain tropes and making a witch look like, frail, scaly skin and no hair and really big eyes, really big ears. Like, okay, yeah, let's make them more human. But that's it. You don't make them more human when you just add all of these random special effects that don't make sense. Like, why is she floating? Why does she have two toes? Why is her nose doing that? Like when she goes down and she starts smelling the kids and her nose gets four times bigger than her face, it's very kid-like. And I get it. It's probably meant for kids than it is for people who are fans of the original story. Because this is a retelling, and maybe you won't show your kids that first story. Maybe you'll show them this one instead, because it's a little more lighthearted. Now, I still love everything else about it because it still goes through the same process of like, oh yeah, they're kids, they become mice, they're talking mice. So it's got that perspective. They definitely do the mice a lot better. The mice is done way better in the reboot than in the original because, of course, it's all CGI, it's all digital. So it's a lot better that way. Um, they do the whole process where they're able to, come back and fight the witches and save the day and whatnot. Now, real quick, this is going to be a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen this film. It's already been out for at least a month and a half, and who hasn't seen the original. This is a spoiler. So if you don't want to hear the spoiler, I would skip over the next 2 minutes or just stop listening right now. But I'm going to talk about the ending, which is probably one of my biggest issues. And again, I can only base this between the two films, not the book. Maybe the book ends the way the first film does. Maybe the book ends the way this new version does. I don't know. All I know is that I liked the original version's ending. Now, the original version, the Grand High Witch had like a secretary who was also like an up and coming witch, but she would abuse her. She'd be like, you don't get to eat with us. Go back to the room. And she'd be like, oh, I hate this job. So in the original one, when the kids and the grandmother finally do their big scheme and they're able to kill all the witches. The only witch that doesn't die is this witch, is this secretary witch. And the little boy is still a mouse, so the grandmother takes him, brings him home, and kind of recreates her house to hold a mouse. She puts, connects and Legos and tubes all over the place so the kid can go running around and be free and not get lost. But of course, he's still a talking mouse, so he'd be able to get her attention in a way. But yeah, it's just her living with her grandson as a mouse. The witch that's left alive becomes a good witch. And she goes and she finds the little boy and she turns him back into a little boy. She turns him from the mouse to the little boy, and then she goes like riding off into the sunset as the good witch in the story, which is a good ending. It's a very good feel good ending. This reboot, it's not only did they incorporate a third mouse, which isn't in the first one is about two mice. This one is about three. And it just so happens that there's only the two boys that become mice. The boy, who's the grandson, has a pet mouse. The pet mouse just so happened to be a mouse that was turned by a witch previously. Just so happens that the grandmother got her kid a mouse to play with, and the mouse was a cursed child that became a mouse. Like, oh man, it's too many things in one. And the ending is just like there's no resolution. They just kind of like, okay, yeah, we're mice. So they just go around being mice forever. And they do this thing where they travel around, they take the witch's money and all the witch's potions, and they go around and they start killing other witches and they start telling people, witches exist, you have to go and fight them. So they send kids out to fight them with the tools that they've created to fight witches, which is out of their potions. And he's still a mouse. Like, not only is he a mouse, but he ages as a mouse. Like there's a narrator at the beginning. I believe the narrator is Chris Rock. He's the narrator at the beginning, and eventually you learn that he's narrating his own story because he plays the voice of the adult version of the kid who turned into the mouse. So not only did they not change the boy from a mouse back into the boy he was, but he aged so much that he became like a full grown adult. And he's a talking mouse that's just riding around killing witches. Like, I don't know if that's a good way to end this story. And I don't know how the author, I'm not going to even say his name again because I'm going to butcher it, but I don't know how the author felt when the original came out, if he was still even alive. I don't know how the story transformed in such a way where that's what the ending they changed to. I don't know which one the original is. I don't know which one the original is. All I know is my preference is that for a feel good movie, the feel good ending to me is how they ended the first one. The 1990 version has more of a feel good ending to me than this original one. So, than this rebooted one. So, it's hard for me to really recommend this and say watch it. I would say watch them both and really give your own critique on it. Again, I'm talking about a movie that I watched as a kid, and that's why my nostalgia is driving me more towards that one. So I want to like that one more, and I want to hate this one more. But the thing is, I don't hate this one. I just don't like how it ends. It's not a bad story at all. It's still a fun movie to watch. It is a lot of fun to watch. The reboot is definitely just as fun to watch as the original, but I will always say the original is going to be better than the first one, especially in this sense. Very rarely will I ever say the rebooted version of a film is better than the original, because if the original wasn't good, then you wouldn't want to reboot it. So that's why I feel that the original is definitely better than this one. But, if you've never seen this either of them, watch them both or watch this new one and give your own opinion on it. I would still say that as if you are a fan of the first one, watching this one will definitely still give you that same feeling of like, oh yeah, it's the witches. Like this is such a good story. This is such a fun story. It's a funny story. It's a quirky story. Watch it. Even if you've never seen the original and you only want to watch this rebooted version because for some reason you hate 90s movies, watch this one. Watch them in any order you want, but again, they're fun movies. Give them a shot. I just don't like the ending. That's my opinion.